don't tell anybody.
People knew Grace by two things: the smooth shine of her father's shoes when he walked into a church hall, and the quiet way she moved at the edges of family photographs. They called her the pastor's daughter, like it was a label stamped on her forehead. They never knew that calling her that name would lead to something else when she left home. How could calling one a pastor's daughter land one in trouble? But what if the very silence they mistook for piety was actually a camouflage? Because the simple truth of who Grace really was, and the dark, pivotal decision that followed, is the one secret no one in the congregation ever saw coming. You too, my friend, are not ready for what is coming. Grace left the house with a suitcase that smelled like soap and the faint sweetness of burnt orange peel from the kitchen. Her hair was braided into neat rows, each plait catching the sunlight like small dark ropes. She walked with the polite, careful steps of someone taught not to take up too much space. Her uniform lay folded in a plastic cover inside the bag. The crest of her school pressed like a promise she did not yet know how to keep. She was not tall. She had the kind of face people said was soft, rounded cheeks, a small mouth that often stayed quiet, and eyes the color of rainwater in the gutter after a storm. When she smiled, it was small, the way a shy bird might let its beak open for a crumb. Her skin had the warm brown of late afternoon. The jewelry she wore was simple. A thin gold chain for Grace's mother had given her. Later in this story, I will ask a trick question if you can get the answer right. So pay attention. Her hands were the hands of someone who learned to fold care into neat shapes. Textbooks the right way, church envelopes the right way, apologies the right way. She held the suitcase handle like it might slip away if she let go. Inside her chest something pulled, part fear, part hunger. She had been told boarding school would make her a woman of character. She had been told it would be good for her. But would it really be good for her? Still, as the car pulled away from the compound with its white gate and the palm tree that had the family birdhouse, she pressed her forehead to the glass and thought of the little lamp in her room at home, the one her mother switched off every night like a benediction. Pastor Bamadiel sat in the front seat, his voice measured as always, the kind of voice built for preaching but soft when it had to be Grace's father. He wore his white shirt ironed crisp, a simple watch on his wrist, the rim of his thumb rough from turning pages of hymn books late into the night. People listened when he spoke. Youth leaders called him for counsel. Mothers brought him their children when they needed comfort. He had the look of a man who carried responsibility the way some men carry their Bible, close to the chest, heavy but sacred. Turns out he could be a villain. He watched Grace in the rearview mirror and felt a restless blur behind his ribs. He had decided on boarding school the week the church calendar exploded with commitments and invitations. He had told himself it was best: disciplined dorm life, good tutors, a place where Grace would grow firm and steady like the pillars in his church, into a woman. He had not thought, then, of how a little girl might feel walking toward those pillars with only the echo of sermons in her ears. She will be safe there, he told himself more than once. Safe, refined, prepared. But between the lines of his plans, there was a fissure of guilt he would not let the congregation see. I preach balance, yet I leave my own child behind. But no, he was wrong. He was very wrong, and he didn't know he would cry. Then it all started. At the school gate, the world changed as if someone had shifted the camera and increased the noise. Girls in uniforms flooded the yard like a river of identical colors. Blue skirts, white short-sleeved shirts, and black shoes, laughter that had the glossy sheen of shared jokes. The compound smelled of stew and wet clay after the morning small rain. Tall orange trees cast long shadows that looked like fingers along the path. The principal's assistant wore spectacles that glinted and carried a clipboard like an officer of rituals. Grace stepped out of the car and felt the ground under her feet with a new kind of attention, as if the solidity might disappear. The strap of her bag dug into the soft skin of her shoulder. She pinched it and made a small face, the movement barely a language. Around her, senior girls clustered, their voices sliding in and out of one another. Everything here was louder than home. More people, more sounds, more hands reaching. Here, people watched her because she was new. They whispered her father's name, and she could feel their eyes on the thin gold chain at her throat. A few of the older girls smiled in what might have been sympathy. Others watched like weather. Grace kept her head low. The first day of anything always did this to her. It would make her into a small thing, easy to overlook, yet painfully visible to those who care to look. Her mother did not come. It was a detail that prickled like a forgotten splinter. She had brushed Grace's hair, tucked a paper note into her suitcase. Be brave. Be kind. And kissed her cheek with a warmth that smelled of soap and prayer. Then she had hesitated at the threshold and said nothing more. The silence after that kiss had been a sound all its own. Inside the dormitory, the beds were iron and arranged like a row of sleeping soldiers. Each bunk had a thin mattress, a mosquito net, and a small shelf carved from wood that smelled faintly of dust. The room hummed with the low thrum of expectation, fans stirring the air, voices trading secrets like currency. Grace found her assigned bed near the window. The sheets felt new and a little stiff. She ran her fingers across the blanket and felt the tiny ridges of the fabric like a map she did not yet know how to read. She met Amina by the lockers, a girl with quick hands and a laugh that arrived like a spark. Amina's hair was braided in a dozen thin strands. She wore a bright hairband that made her look like she did not take herself too seriously. She reached for Grace's suitcase as if to help and gave a little grin. "You from Lagos?" she asked. Her voice was friendly, but with a toughness that said she had seen a lot of things and was willing to share. "Yes," Grace said. The word felt small in her mouth. Amina looked at the gold chain and then up into Grace's face. "Pastor Bamadiel's girl," she said, nodding like she had just read a label on a book. There was no malice in it, only curiosity. "You'll be fine. Dorm life is a story. You'll learn the chapters." Grace wanted to believe her. She wanted to believe the chapters would be comforting pages. Inside, however, she felt a tremor of loneliness shape itself into a steady ache. She missed the family noises of home, the kettle's whistle, her father's laughter when the Bible study ended late, her mother humming as she folded sheets. She missed being the little lamp left on by the wardrobe. The first assembly in the school hall was a spectacle. Flags that hung like silent birds, the principal's podium polished like a promise, a choir whose song lifted and folded like wings. Grace sat with the other new girls, knees pressed together, hands folded in her lap, as if in a small shrine. Her ears found the rhythm of the choir and the curving cadences of the principal's speech. She tried to take it all in, to record it like a careful student of life. When the principal spoke of discipline and honor, Grace nodded. Her father would have liked that. But under the polite nods of the assembly, a small part of her listened for different words, words of belonging, of an adult who might notice the quiet edges of her. The world here had grown louder, but not necessarily kinder. It was during the slow walk back to the dorm, under the arches of the corridor where the light made long, cool bars across the tiled floor, that she saw her. Precious stood with two senior girls by the dining hall, elbows resting on a wooden railing as if the place belonged to her. She was taller than Grace, but not imposing. Her hair fell in a sleek black wave that caught the light, and she had a smile that looked like it had been practiced in front of mirrors. Her uniform was neat, but there was something in the way she carried herself, an ease that was almost dangerous, as if the rules were a suggestion she could choose to ignore. Grace's mouth went dry. She recognized in Precious the kind of person people listened to, the kind someone might follow because following felt like stepping into warmth. Precious's eyes were sharp and bright. When they found Grace, they held her like someone looking at a small, fragile plant and imagining what it could become. There was a softness there, but also a hardness that made Grace sit straighter. Precious smiled and stepped forward like someone approaching a stage. "You must be the pastor's daughter," she said. Her voice was low and smooth, the kind that invites trust even before a word can be judged. She extended a hand that was steady and cool against Grace's, and Grace felt something move inside her chest, an odd mix of relief and something else she could not yet name. Grace shook the hand. "Yes." Her voice felt like a thread. "Don't worry. Precious said, and in the little tilt of her head there was a promise. "Oh, nice. I'll show you around." She did not sound like someone who spoke often of rules. She sounded like someone who kept soft secrets. For a moment, Pastor Bamadiel watched from the far end of the corridor, his eyes on the exchange like a shepherd assessing a new lamb. He straightened his shoulders and reminded himself of the plans he had made. The tutors, the morning prayers, the strict visiting hours. He wanted to believe the school would keep Grace safe. He watched the way Grace's fingers curled around Precious's palm and felt a hollowing at his center. Keep an eye on her, he told himself. Check in. Stay present. But the calendar had a way of rearranging intentions, and sermons had a way of swallowing afternoons. He touched the watch on his wrist and felt the pulse of time moving with the regular, unerring beat of duty. As the afternoon light slanted through the corridor and painted the girl's shoes in gold, Grace walked to her bunk with a small buoyancy. Someone had acknowledged her. Someone had offered help. The thought felt like a warm hand at the back of her neck, and for the first time since she had stepped into the compound, a small part of her allowed itself to believe that maybe here she might learn to stand. But underneath that first, warm lift, there was a small, stubborn pebble of doubt that would not quite settle. She pressed her palm to the berth and felt the hardness of the mattress through the sheet. Be brave, the note from her mother said inside her suitcase. Be kind. She repeated the words quietly, like a prayer. And somewhere nearby, where the corridors bent and the shadows gathered, Precious watched with a smile that did not quite touch her eyes. It was a smile that promised stories, some bright, some dark, and in the tilt of her head there was an invitation and a question. Grace could not name it yet. She only felt the current of attention move around her like wind. The camera of the world lingered on that small, settled scene. A girl setting herself inside a new life, a father wrestling with his choices, and a senior with a smile that could be read many ways. The story, like all true stories, would take its time. The next steps were small, and they would matter. On the very first night Grace met Precious, the rain was loud enough to hide secrets. The hostel windows rattled. Footsteps echoed down the long, dim hall. In the middle of that noise, Grace stood like someone who had just misplaced herself, small, stiff in a borrowed blazer, clutching a tin plate of stew. Her cheeks were pale. Her eyes kept going to the door, as if she expected her parents to walk in and call her name. Grace looked 12 in her smallness, though in truth she might have been a little older. She was thin, with hair braided tight to her scalp and a backpack that hung like a question behind her. Her uniform was neat because home had taught neatness. Her shoes were polished, the way her father liked them. But something in her face said she was used to listening more than talking. The world of the hostel was loud and full of other people's stories, and Grace's story felt like it had been paused. The camera of memory would later show Precious as she first appeared, taller, moving with a slow confidence that made people step aside without meaning to. Precious wore her blazer rolled at the sleeves, a small silver ring on her thumb, and a ribbon in her hair that looked chosen on purpose. Dark, glossy, the kind of thing that catches light and keeps it. Her skin was warm in the way the sun warms the side of your face. Her eyes were the kind that watched and remembered. She laughed the way some people breathe, easy, full, as if the world owed her nothing but stories. When a senior shoved Grace's elbow and smirked, the laughter in the dining hall turned sharp like snapped string. Food splattered. Grace's hand shook. For a moment, she was invisible, a small thing in a crowded room with nowhere to hide. Precious moved without hurry. She did not shout. She stepped close enough that Grace could hear the soft click of her ring against the table. "Boy," Precious said, and the single word had weight. The senior froze. People looked up. "Leave her," Precious said, and more than the words did something in her tone. It was not mean. It was not loud. It was like a hand placed on fear and told it to sit still. Grace felt her breath steady. Relief first, then curiosity. Who was this person who makes the laughing stop? After the rush of embarrassment died down, Precious sat with Grace, not in the center of the hall where everyone watched. They moved to a quieter corner where the old radio hummed and shadows pooled in the corners like deep water. Precious reached across the table and laid a hand on Grace's wrist, small, casual, like one kid helping another. The touch was quick, but Grace felt it in that hollow place inside her chest where loneliness lived. The touch felt like a promise. You belong somewhere, her muscles said, though her mouth did not. Name? Precious asked. Her voice was soft, curious. Grace, she answered, and the word came out like someone reading from a list. Grace, Precious repeated, testing it. That's a beautiful name. Grace's face warmed. She said my name like it mattered, Grace thought. Like it wasn't just something people used to call me when my father was around. From that night, a pattern started. Precious would find Grace between classes. She would send her a paper note that smelled faintly of perfume, telling her which bench to sit at or where the best mangoes were sold. Sometimes Precious would bring Grace a small slice of bread torn from her own plate. Eat, she'd say. You look like you need it. These were little things. Small. Harmless. They meant everything to someone who had learned to wait. Grace began to notice small details about Precious that she would keep in the secret drawer of her mind. The curve of her smile when she found something funny, the freckle by her left ear, the way she smoothed the ribbon in her hair when she was thinking. Precious walked with a casual pride, as if the world was hers to shape. She knew when to speak and when to be silent. She taught Grace to read the room, to sense when teachers were tired, when Mrs. Dada's eyes would wander, when the dorm lights were low enough to slip out. Inside Precious's head, the view was different. She's small, Precious thought, watching Grace tuck her hair behind one ear while pretending not to notice the attention. She smells like lavender and old columns. She's careful, too careful. She needs a hand to pull her out of boxes. It's easy. She'll follow if I show the right light. Precious had a past that she never announced out loud. She had learned early to be the one who steadied others, because being the steady one kept her safe. She had been the protector, sometimes out of choice, sometimes out of survival. That history had sharpened her instincts. She knew how to give comfort in the exact shape someone needed, a joke, an offhand compliment, and knowing look. She knew how to make someone feel significant and how to make them owe their new calm to her. She taught Grace small rebellions first. You can take this, she whispered one afternoon, sliding an extra snack into Grace's palm. Say you had it from the tuck shop. They won't ask. Grace's fingers closed around the snack. Her heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from the thrill of sharing a secret. Is it wrong? Grace asked later, voice barely above the whisper of laundry machines. Precious smiled like someone who had practiced the answer. Wrong is sometimes what other people tell you. Right is how you feel inside when you decide for yourself. Precious showed her how to bend the rules without breaking them. A different route back from class, a library time that wasn't on the schedule, a note that said ill when you were simply tired. She taught Grace the difference between being caught and being careful. She taught her how to meet eyes with a teacher and say the right apology, the right lie, with hands folded like a prayer. All of this came wrapped in care. There were nights when Precious sat with Grace under a dim bulb and listened to her talk about home, about the way her father prayed, about the weight of being the perfect child. Something honest would flash in Grace, a small, bitter ache. They say I'm perfect, Grace said once, fingers twisting at a loose thread on her sleeve. But I don't feel like that. Precious listened and nodded. Perfection is a heavy cloth, she said. You don't have to wear it all the time. Grace believed that. She wanted to believe that. Amina, Grace's roommate and one of the few other constant presences, watched the change from a distance, puzzled. Amina was round-faced and quick to laugh, with a freckled nose and a way of asking questions that made people answer truthfully, sometimes against their will. She noticed Grace staying up later than before, her eyes searching the dark like someone looking for an animal sound. You okay? Amina asked one night as Grace returned from a walk, the moon slicing the sky. Grace's answer was small. I'm fine, she said. She's not fine, Amina thought. She's moving like someone learning to swim in a new current. The most dangerous lesson Precious taught was how pleasure and danger wore the same coat. She would hand Grace a book of poems and say, read this and remember you're allowed to feel more than one thing. The words in the book were gentle about rivers and wild places. They made Grace's chest ache and bloom at once. Emotions became a kind of weather, sudden and bright as thunder, or slow and gray as drizzle. Grace liked that. She liked feeling like a landscape instead of an empty room. One afternoon, while the sun looked like warm coins on the yard, Precious took Grace's hand and led her into the old art room. The paint smell was thick and honest. The room smelled like someone's daydream. Precious closed the heavy door and sat on a stool by the window. The light made dust move like tiny stars. "You can tell me anything," she said. Grace's voice was small. "What if I don't know what I want?" "That's okay," Precious said. "Most people don't. You don't have to know to start. You only need to try." Precious's words pressed on Grace's ribs like a palm, felt strangely solid. "Try what?" Grace wondered. "Try being someone else? Try being brave? Try being bad?" Precious smiled, and there was a softness there that almost kept Grace from noticing the careful line around Precious's eyes, the part of the face that measured danger and counted risks. "Start with the small things," Precious said. "No one notices the small changes. They only notice the storm." Those words lodged in Grace like a seed. But the slow danger of Precious was not just in what she taught. It was in the way she made secrecy feel like kindness. "This is ours," she would say, pressing the pads of her thumb against Grace's palm in a small, secret handshake they made up. "No one needs to know. Not now." Grace liked the secretness. Secrets made her feel important. They made the heavy hush of her home life seem farther away. They made her feel chosen. From Precious's point of view, each secret was a knot to be tied. "They trust me now," she thought. "Let them. Later, when they need me most, they will come." The story in this part does not race. It drifts and deepens the way water does in a riverbed, collecting leaves and small stones. Scenes are small: a shared sandwich, a late-night study session, someone giving a comforting shoulder squeeze after a bad exam. Each small moment is a thread. By the end of those first weeks, Grace felt different in ways she could not name. She laughed more easily, but sometimes it felt like someone else's laugh. She began to look at her reflection in the washroom mirror and search for a new face. Her shoes clicked differently on the dorm floor. The sharpness of her old obedience softened. There was a new quiet in the way she crossed her arms when a teacher spoke. Then, one rainy night when the lights went out for a moment and the whole hostel held its breath, Precious leaned in close and said very softly, "You're not as innocent as they think. I can show you who you really are." Grace heard everything and understood less than half. Her stomach turned. Something in her tensed and then loosened. "Show me?" she thought. Why would she want to show me that? The camera pulls in tight on Grace's face. Pupils a little larger, rainwater and candlelight reflected like questions. The room around them hums with the sound of blankets settling and distant whispers. Grace's hands are bare in her lap. The touch of Precious's words left a warm ring there, like a footprint on the skin. She felt both afraid and strangely hungry. That was the worst kind of feeling, wanting the very thing that frightened you. Grace did not answer that night. She only looked at Precious and felt the pull of something new, a map with one path drawn in bright ink. The choice lay before her like a closed door with a key pressed into the lock. And somewhere in the back of Grace's mind, a small voice said, "Do not turn the key." But the rest of her, the part that had been waiting for someone to look at her and not demand perfection, leaned forward, almost without knowing. The dining hall was a bright, loud ocean of plates and laughter, but Grace felt like a small boat drifting away from all of it. Lights flickered on the long tables, voices rose and fell like waves, and the windows kept the night outside where it belonged, a safe, distant dark. She sat at the edge of the row, shoulders folded inward like someone trying to hide from the sound of themselves. Grace was slight and careful. Her school uniform hung a little loose on her slim frame. Her hair was braided tight against her scalp, the braids falling over one shoulder like a long, dark rope. Her eyes watched people the way someone watches birds, curious and quietly afraid of sudden movement. At home, she had been the pastor's daughter, used to polite smiles and measured words. Here she had learned to make a smaller sort of face so she would not be noticed. I shouldn't have come tonight, she thought as the laughter rose. They'll ask questions. Pastor will notice if I change. It's easier to leave before anyone pulls me into this big, bright noise. Her fingers found the edge of her plate. The metal was cool, steadying. She told herself she could walk back to the hostel, go to her room, and read until sleep came. Across the hall, Precious watched from where she sat with older girls. She moved like someone who owned the corner she lived in, steady, sure of the space her body filled. Taller than many, she had broad shoulders and a quiet curve to her mouth that made people trust her. Precious's face could be warm. She used the warmth like a tool. When she smiled at a younger girl, the smile reached her eyes and made most people believe she was simple and kind. But there was a careful sharpness behind that kindness, a memory of things she had learned young and learned to keep in the dark. They don't see the cracks, she thought, watching Grace. They never see how easy the world is to move if you know where the hinges are. Grace rose under the excuse that she needed the washroom. The corridor beyond the hall smelled of wet shoes and old paint. Shoes squeaked. The hostel felt alive in a way she did not belong to. She walked quickly, the hem of her skirt brushing the back of her knees, each step making her heart hit the inside of her chest like a small drum. The washroom was a cold place with tiles that remembered 1,000 feet. The mirrors were fogged at the edges. The sinks had the faint smell of soap and something metallic in the pipes. Grace let the water run and cupped her hands, splashing her face until the cold bit the dull ache in her head. In the reflection, she saw someone who had been trying to learn how to look like she belonged. Be calm, she told herself. Just go back. Don't make a fuss. Her breath steamed in the mirror. Her fingers were trembling a little, and when she ran them through her braid, they came back slightly damp. She did not like being alone, but she did not know how to tell anyone the way the world pushed against her ribs. A shadow moved at the edge of the mirror. Precious was there before Grace fully understood the shape. The sound of step, the soft rustle of fabric. She came up behind Grace, and for a moment the washroom swelled so small that only the two of them existed. Precious's voice was soft. "Grace," she said, like someone calling a friend from across a field. "Why are you alone here?" Grace turned, startled. Precious's face leaned in, full of easy concern. Up close, her skin was a smooth brown and her eyes were bright. Her hand reached out, not touching, hovering like an offered umbrella. "I thought you were in the hall," Grace said. Her voice was smaller than she expected. Precious took a step closer. She had the kind of face that felt like a promise. "I wanted to see you," she said. "I have something for you." Her fingers brushed the inside pocket of her blazer and produced a small, tied black strip of nylon. It was too small to matter at first glance, a bag no larger than a coin purse. Inside, white powder moved, a pale secret. Grace blinked. The nylon looked ordinary against Precious's dark fingers. The powder was white and soft, like spilled flour or the thin dust that gathered on old windows. Precious held it carefully between two fingers, as if the nylon itself were a living thing. Precious watched Grace's face as if measuring the space between her eyebrows. "It'll help," she said, the words slow, precise. "When you feel tight, when you want to be brave. Just a little. I did it once when I was upset. I promise you it helps." Her voice had a softness that was also a nudge. Grace swallowed. Her throat felt dry. "I don't," she began. Don't rose in her like a small animal ready to run. Don't take it. Don't listen. Don't let her in. But beneath that, something else pushed forward, the ache of not being seen, the longing to be chosen by someone older and steady. Precious had been the first person to bring snacks when Grace missed home, the first to laugh with her in corners. There was a ribbon of gratitude that wound tight inside Grace. "Please," Precious said, and the sound was almost a plea. She moved closer, so close that Grace could see the lines at the corner of her mouth, the tiny scar on her knuckle. That scar, for some reason, made Grace think of someone who had survived something sharp. "I won't let you get caught. I'm careful. You can trust me." The hand that reached out this time was not hovering. It was certain. Precious set the nylon on the sink and used her thumb to tear it open. The powder puffed out shallow and dry. For a beat, it looked harmless, a small puff of dust in the cold light. Grace backed away. The tiles felt very hard under her feet. "I can't," she whispered. "I." Precious's palm came up and pressed gently at the base of Grace's throat, not hard enough to hurt, but there is a reminder of the space she owned. "You once told me your father is always busy," she said quietly, eyes steady. "You said you'd rather have someone who listens." "I listen, Grace. I know you. This will take the loud away. You'll breathe easier." "I don't want this," Grace thought. "I don't want to be changed like this. I don't want someone else to decide what I am." Her fingers curled around the sink, so tight the skin paled. The powder sat between them, a round, small thing that seemed to hum. Precious leaned in and held the bag to Grace's face. A faint smell, like chalk and old medicine, rose. It made Grace's tongue feel thick and slow. She felt dizzy at the smell alone. "Just once," Precious said, as if reading the secrets that passed over Grace's face. "Just one time." Grace's vision blurred a little at the edges. The world slurred in a narrow tube of light that made the laughter from the dining hall sound like a far wind. "Please," she thought, but the word had no shape. Her hand twitched, and before she could push Precious away, the older girl moved with a quick, practiced motion. The powder spilled, not a proper pour, but a forced push, into Grace's cupped palms and then, before she could think, into her mouth. Grace tasted dust and metallic grit. Her reflex was to cough and pull back. Precious's other hand came up and covered Grace's mouth with a steady, silencing pressure. The skin of her palm was warm, not rough. It fit over Grace's mouth like a lid. "Shoo!" Precious breathed close to her ear. "I'm here. Breathe with me." The breath was oddly calming, but the closeness made Grace's chest squeeze. Air became heavy. Her heartbeat went loud and quick, then oddly slow. "I can't breathe." The thought bloomed sharp and then dulled. Her knees felt soft, the tile leaning at a strange angle beneath them. She tried to spit. The taste of the powder turned everything metallic and wrong. Her eyes watered, and the edges of her vision seemed like cloth fraying. Precious's voice wrapped around her again, low and calm. "It'll wash through you," she said. "You'll sleep. You'll forget the weight for a while." There was care in the words, but it was a care that closed doors. Grace's senses slipped. Sound went thinner, like something being pulled tight. The fluorescent light above made a star at the center of her sight, then two stars, and then nothing at all but a soft, black cloud spreading across the glass of her eyes. Her hands clenched, then loosened. The sink looked far away, tiny as a toy. "I don't want to go," she thought, the thought of a small boat losing oars. "I don't want to." The rest vanished. From the corridor, shoes passed, and a laugh floated into the washroom like a bright bird. Precious stayed, steady as a stone, her hand still over Grace's face, as if keeping a secret under a palm. Her other hand folded the empty nylon and tucked it into her pocket with the same care one folds a treasured, dangerous thing. For a moment, a quiet, terrible breath, Precious watched the last light leave Grace's eyes. There was a tenderness there that did not belong to kindness. In the space where the girl lay quiet, something in Precious's chest shifted, a memory of being small and abandoned and taught that silence kept you safe. "This is for you," she told herself. "I'm saving you from the noise." Yet under that thought, another coiled, the knowledge that she could hold a power over someone, and that power tasted like control. When Grace slipped, the world narrowed and went black with the hush of falling. The sink was a white moon in the dark. The hum of the building thudded like a distant drum. Precious pressed her palm a fraction longer, then eased away. She crouched beside Grace, one long breath that smelled faintly of the food from the dining hall and the faint spice on her own skin. "You'll be okay," she whispered, not to Grace, but to the quiet room. "I'll keep you." The words were both a promise and a map. The camera of the moment pulls out slowly. The clean tiles, the single black nylon in Precious's pocket, the pale face folded against her arm. The noise of the dining hall continues, as if nothing has shifted, a river of sound that will never know the drop that fell into the washroom that night. Back in the dining hall, a plate scraped. Someone laughed. The night kept its bright, everyday shape. But for Grace, the world had changed. The ordinary had been nudged aside, and a small, dangerous thing had slipped in its place. The washroom light hummed, and the corridor held its breath. Question: what did Grace's mother give her when she was coming to the boarding school? Grace moved like someone learning a new shadow. The dorm lights hummed low. The sound pressed against the wooden beds and the thin curtains. In the hush between lights out and the very long night, she slipped on her shoes with hands that trembled as if they belonged to someone waking from a fever. Her hair hung braided down her back, a dark rope that swung when she walked. Until lately, she had walked like the pastor's daughter. Chin level, shoulders steady, steps measured. Now the steady was gone. Even her fingers looked uncertain under the moonlight. It's only tonight, she told herself as she closed the door behind her. Just tonight. I can stop. The thought felt thin and slippery, like a coin she could not hold. Grace's lips tasted faintly of something sweet and metallic. The memory of it made her stomach drop and lift at once. When she breathed, the air felt too large for her lungs. She kept her head bowed, so that even if someone glanced her way through the window, they would see nothing more than a girl moving with purpose. Purpose, she thought, is safer than asking for help. Across the room, Amina pretended to sleep. Amina was smaller than Grace by a head. Quick hands, quick eyes, and a laugh that arrived before her words. Her hair was always in a tidy bun. Her uniform always neat. She liked the feeling of things in order because the rest of life often was not. She watched Grace every few nights from the edge of waking, like a lighthouse keeper watching a single light. At first, she had thought it was just homesickness, Grace's father and the big church and the quiet silver of their house. But the small things grew: missed prayers, a dirty plate tucked under Grace's pillow, eyes that looked through people instead of at them. Amina listened to the dorm breathe, then slipped out of bed. Her feet whispered on the cool floor. She did not tell herself she would follow Grace at first. She simply rose, because worry does not always admit its shape. If something is wrong, I'll fix it. The thought was both a promise and a question. The corridor smelled of polish and late-night tea. Dorm doors stood half open like yawning mouths. A single bulb burned at the end of the hallway, casting long, patient shadows that made every step feel like a small theft. Amina moved like a camera panning slowly, quiet, careful, recording the facts. Grace's shoes left faint prints on the polished floor. They headed toward the older block where the library and the little service latrine hid behind a stand of mango trees. Grace paused by the service latrine and pressed her back to the cool wall, knees folding inward, breath hitching. Her heart hammered hard enough that she felt it in her teeth. Her fingers found a small nylon scrap she had tucked in her sleeve, the scrap that smelled faintly like starch and lemon, the scrap that made her both small and large at once. She rolled it gently between her thumb and forefinger, not to use it now, not to feel the rush, but to anchor herself. It was like touching a very sharp stone, and she knew the memory of it would stay under her skin all day. I am not weak, she whispered into the night. I'm not like them. The lie sounded like itself. Amina waited at a corner a few steps away, heart thudding, palms cold. She had watched Grace all week, making small disappearances, skipping the morning assembly, staying late in the practice room, drawing her curtains tight when the sun wanted to enter. Amina had seen the change most in Grace's hands. They had stopped fidgeting with the rosary she always carried, and now always reached for the pocket of her jacket, as if to find a secret there. Amina moved like someone assembling a puzzle. She had begun collecting little things: a torn scrap of paper with a scrawled word, a faint white dust on Grace's sleeve, the smell of something like broken candy on the pillow. Each piece made a different noise in her chest. They did not yet make a picture, but she could feel the outline. She crept closer until she could see Grace's shoulders rise and fall. By the dim light from the latrine window, Grace's face looked thin, the color washed out from her cheeks. Her eyes were unfocused in the way of someone looking for a place to rest that was not there. Amina wanted to call out, to demand an explanation, to drag Grace back to warmth and breakfast and the steady rhythm of the day. But when she looked at Grace's face, something soft and fierce pressed down behind her ribs. This was not just a friend who needed scolding. This was a person who might need rescue. The idea of force made Amina's mouth dry. She could not imagine how to reach the part of Grace that had slipped away. Please don't let this be a secret she carries alone, Amina thought. From behind the squat building, a shadow untucked itself and came close, Precious, with her easy smile and a habit of appearing where she was least expected. Precious moved like someone with veteran confidence. Tall, shoulders like carved wood, clothes that fit without effort. At a glance, she looked composed. Hair loose and glossy, teeth bright when she smiled. But when Amina watched the way she lowered her eyes and spoke, there was an edge like winter glass. Grace rose to meet her as if a long-pulled thread had finally been tugged. Their voices folded into the dark in low, urgent whispers. Amina could not make out the words, only the cadence. Grace's staccato little breaths and Precious's calm, steady voice that soothed and soothed until something in Grace's posture softened. Amina moved behind the mango tree, pressing herself into the shadow, and peered through a slit in the leaves. This was the risk she had vowed to take. To see. She watched the small scene like a lens zooming in. Precious touched Grace's hand. A brief, almost formal gesture, and Grace flinched at the contact and then leaned into it as if it were a shelter. Amina's stomach folded over. She felt like someone seeing a house on fire for the first time and knowing the simple truth. If you do nothing, the blaze spreads. Tell someone. Tell someone. The command pressed at her throat, but another feeling, softer and stranger, rose in its place. Amina had grown used to being the steady one. She liked being the person who kept things from falling apart. But what if telling only broke Grace further? What if Grace lashed out? The thought of losing her friend made Amina's hand shake. She waited. When the two parted, Grace moved away first, shoulders slumped as if she had no weight left to carry. Precious watched her go with a smile that did not touch her eyes. Amina stepped out before the path was completely clear, the crunch of her shoes on the gravel loud as a drumbeat. Grace spun, startled. For a breath the world narrowed to the two of them. The moon, the tree, the sudden exposure. "What are you doing?" Grace asked. Her voice had a brittle edge, equal parts fear and anger. Her hand flew to the pocket of her jacket. The movement was sharp, protective, animal. Amina swallowed. She wanted to say everything, the scraps and the dust, and the way Grace's voice had changed. Instead, she folded her arms and let her anger do her work for her. "You've been disappearing," she said. "You're not sleeping. You're not eating. Tell me what's going on, Grace." Grace's mouth thinned. For a moment, she looked like a child trying to hide a bruise. Then she smiled, the small, careful smile that had stopped reaching her eyes, and she tried to shut the door. "It's nothing," she said. "Go back to bed." Amina took another step. "If it's nothing, why hide it? If it's nothing, why are you so jumpy? If it's—" her voice cracked. "If someone is hurting you, tell me." Grace's fingers curled around Amina's sleeve with surprising force. The touch was desperate and small. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You can't." Her voice dropped so low Amina had to lean in. "You'd ruin everything." Amina heard the word ruin, and it rang like a bell. She imagined a reputation tumbled, a father in a pulpit crushed, a life with doors closed. The fear was real, raw, and it made Grace plead in a way Amina had never heard. Amina's hand hovered, torn between shaking Grace loose and holding her steady. She noticed then the fine dust on Grace's cuff that glittered under the moon, the dust that smelled faint and sweet. It looked harmless enough, almost like flour. The sight snagged in her heart. "Let me help," Amina said quietly. "Let me in, please." Grace's eyes filled with moisture that made them glassy. For a heartbeat, she seemed to wobble between retreat and confession. Her chest rose, as if she were about to say something that had been burning inside her for weeks. But then Precious's face slid into her mind, calm, warm, convincing. Grace tightened her jaw, and the tenderness in her eyes turned to steel. "You promise me," she said, voice tight. "Please." Amina's jaw clenched. Promises were like vows, and she knew how dangerous promises could be when made under pressure, when secrets lived between them like hungry animals. She wanted to pull Grace to her and tell her everything would be okay. But she also knew people could be hurt by being rescued before they were ready. "Okay," Amina said, finally, and the word felt like surrender. "Okay, but I'm staying with you. I watch. If anything goes wrong, I tell." Grace let out a breath that sounded like someone who had been holding their breath underwater for far too long. "No," she said, voice small and firm. "Not that. Not tomorrow. Not anyone." Amina nodded because she could not force the larger world to change. She could only be the person at Grace's side. They walked back to the dorm with arms nearly touching. The moon packed the night into a thin ribbon above them, and the trees leaned like listeners. Amina felt the weight of the night settle in her bones. She had taken a first step, one that might lead to saving Grace, or to losing her completely. The not knowing hung between them like an omen. "I will not let her go," Amina promised herself as she curled back into bed. The vow felt like both a shield and a rope. Inside the dorm, Grace rested her hand on the folded scrap in her pocket and pressed it to her chest as if it could soothe the tremor in her sternum. She told herself that she could handle this without anyone else. She told herself she did not want to drag Amina into the dark. But when sleep pulled at her, she dreamed of a hallway full of doors slamming shut one by one, and woke with her heart pounding, convinced she had already lost the key. Outside, the mango trees whispered. Something in the night had shifted. The camera of the story pulled back slow and steady, leaving the two of them in the small, fragile world between truth and secrecy, where one decision could lead them deeper into danger or back toward light. The next night, Amina would follow again. She would keep the list of small, honest facts in her pocket like stones, collect them, press them, and try to build a path toward help. But she could not know, not yet, how close Grace stood to a cliff or how persuasive a voice like Precious's could be in the dark. For now, the dorm slept and the moon kept watch. The story tightened like a drawn breath. Soon, Amina thought, "I will know everything." And that thought trembled on the thin edge between hope and dread. If you've made it here, then it is a sign you are destined for greatness. Hit the subscribe button now so you won't miss the next part when I upload it. Thanks for watching.